Hey, everybody, welcome back to Black Lotus, where we talk about all things strange and unusual. And today we're going to be discussing something that's a little different from what we're used to talking about. I mean, we are going to be talking about alien abductions, but what we're going to be focusing on are kind of the aftermath and what people go through after they've been abducted. And and we have a special guest with us today, Lloyd Zehner, who is a UFO investigator. And but first, before we get into all that, let's say hi to the crew. Unfortunately, Keith isn't with us today. And we're kind of speculating as to whether or not he's going to be back because he has his other show going. And he's a busy guy. But anyway, we've got Wild Trees with us, and we also have Michael from DarkHour Paranormal. Guys, how you doing? Oh, Michael, you're muted or something.
It could have been that something, but yeah, how are you guys doing? Fantastic over here.
What's going on, Wild?
I'm doing really good. I'm in southern Texas, and it's pretty cold here. I'm sure it's nothing compared to the rest of America, but it is cold here too.
Yeah, it's chilly here too, but we're in Las Vegas, so it doesn't get really cold, ever really. But so anyway, Lloyd, tell us about tell us about your experience in the past. Now you've been investigating the paranormal for well over 40 years. Is that correct?
Right. Correct. I started out in the paranormal back in the early 70s. I'm originally from New Orleans. And believe it or not, the first thing I ever saw was a full-bodied apparition. And that kind of springboarded me into the paranormal. I didn't even know what I was looking at the time. This entity happened to be walking behind a friend of mine who had just closed his front door at his house and was walking towards my car. And when he got to the end of the fence line, he took a right and it took a left, and it was gone in about 2 or 3 seconds. My girlfriend, as soon as he got in the car, because I couldn't believe what I was looking at, asked him, who was that fellow walking behind you? And he said, "What are you talking about?" And strange part about that was we went out for a night of bar hopping, and the bar that we happened to go to was just a few miles away, and next door, a few doors over, was a fire station. And all the trucks came running out of the fire station to go on a fire call. And we were sitting there watching them all leaving, and he comes up with the bright idea, "Hey, why don't we follow them and see where they're going?" So we all piled in my car and drove behind the fire trucks. When we caught up with them, where do we end up? At his house.
Whoa.
His house is on fire.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah. And we're just all sitting there in disbelief, kind of mingling in the crowd with some of the neighbors. And a woman I happened to strike up a conversation with said, "Well, that house has been on the market for a long time. There was an old sea captain that passed away in that house. And she thought that he died smoking in bed." Well, the funny part was he had just bought this house maybe 4 months prior to the fire. And he had been telling me that he didn't smoke, and he was smelling pipe tobacco occasionally in the house. Some things moving, nothing major, but things that he was getting concerned with. And the fire actually started in his bedroom in the bed. So you put 2 and 2 together. The guy that I saw walking behind him, he did have on a jacket with brass buttons in the front, which after I put 2 and 2 together, it had to be the sea captain.
Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
that was the craziest thing ever. But that launched me into the paranormal. Joined the group, didn't know what the heck I was doing, of course. Back then in the 70s, the equipment was limited. We didn't know what half of us were doing. And I happened to be on a case that was in a Plano, Texas, north of Plano, Texas, probably about 10 miles away from Ross Perot's business, ELS. It was an old farmhouse. And while we were there, we had a psychic on the team. She was supposed to be pretty good. I didn't know anything about psychics or their abilities. And for 2 nights in a row, she couldn't pick up on anything. And she might have said a half a dozen times, something's blocking me. I'm trying to pick up on something, but I'm getting blocked. I don't know what it is. Well, we didn't get a whole lot of anything out of that investigation. And Monday, I was getting ready to leave work. And one of the guys from the group called me. He said, "Hey," he said, "you forgot to pick up an extension cord and a tripod. It's probably still out there at the farmhouse. Can you pick it up?" And I said, "Sure." So I hurried up and left work, was trying to get there before it got dark. And it had rained cats and dogs the night before. The road to get to it was a dirt road, and it was pretty sloppy. So I couldn't get but maybe, 30 yards away from the house. And I left the truck running. I left the lights on. I walked into the house. I had a flashlight, found the extension cord, found the tripod, was making my way back to the truck, and my flashlight went out. And then my truck engine cut off, and the lights went off on the truck. And I felt like a light brush of heat on the back of my neck and my head. And as soon as I turned around, it was a flash of light. I look up in the sky and see this bright bluish white beam of light shooting beneath a UFO.
Wow.
And I'm standing there in awe. Oh yeah, I'm just standing there frozen. Couldn't believe what I was looking at. And it was shimmering. It was doing a shimmering type effect. Like maybe it was trying to cloak itself, or maybe it had on some protective membrane around it, because it was shimmering from like a silverish color to a blackish color. And I probably observed it for maybe a minute and a half. It was probably less than, I would say, 1,000 feet, probably 500 or 600 feet above the tree line. And it was over a pond. And I was just sitting there in awe, frozen, looking at it. And way off in the distance, I could see something orange. And it was getting bigger and brighter and coming towards the UFO. And it was a pretty good size orange glowing fireball, like an orb, I would call it, maybe the size of a Volkswagen. And it went right in underneath the craft. And within maybe 3 to 5 seconds after that happened, it took off in a blink of an eye. It was gone.
Wow.
And I said to myself, no, nobody is going to believe this. People are going to tag me. They're going to think I'm crazy. And what did dumbass me do? I go to work the next morning and tell a co-worker I just about got fired. I mean, people thought I was nuts. But that pretty much started me into ufology, and I got lucky because that really mentally did something to me for a couple of weeks. I mean, I couldn't get it out of my mind what I had seen. And of course, the group I was in, a paranormal group, they fully understood and believed what I was telling them. They didn't doubt it for a second. One of the people in the group had seen a UFO, but nothing like what I had seen. And I got lucky and went to a party and got in a conversation with a guy who kind of took an interest in me. And come to find out, he worked for, I can't say the name of the company, but he was a defense contractor. He developed guidance missile systems for missiles for the military. And he had a small group of about 5 or 6 scientists. They were all scientists in that group, and they took me into their fold They were all interested in my story about the UFO. I figured, these guys are going to think I'm bullshit and I'm crazy. But the stories they told me about some of the things that they experienced was just beyond belief. I mean, a lot of these guys actually got the opportunity to ride out on aircraft. And I got to be careful what I'm talking about because 2 of them are still employed. The rest are retired at this point. But a couple of them used to have the opportunity to go out and see these things actually get tested. And a few of them actually had UFOs follow the planes. They were tracked on radar, fly off from the wing of the plane. Oh, yeah, several times out in the desert in various parts of the country, mostly in Nevada and New Mexico. And they had some harrowing stories. It was incredible. I'm still in touch with all those guys. We talk every couple of weeks, sharing stories and different things. And they're for real, guys. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. I'm a believer. I know it exists.
Lloyd, let me ask you very quickly. You're telling me that you know people that are witnessing the experimentation with these crafts, or at least seeing them in flight and so forth. What is your opinion on Bob Lazar's story? Because he is a very controversial figure, and I think that the field is really polarized when it comes to him. I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, in all honesty, I've been on the fence with this guy for a long time. You go back to Stanton Friedman talking about him doing a background check on him, and he's not finding any records of his college, employment, and various other things that Friedman followed up on. Yet you have other people say they saw him at Area 51 working, employed. Now, I wouldn't put it past the government to do disinformation on this guy and discredit him. And you think about it, he's never really been one like some of the others in ufology to run out there and be looking to make a quick buck on this. He's never really done that.
Right.
Most of the people that talk about him, that met him, that knew him, verify that he's for real. And then you've got the other people like Stanton Friedman and a few other ones that you don't know what they really were able to check into to verify his employment, his college degrees, and so forth, if it's true. And you would actually think, the government has a unique way of erasing lots of things on people's backgrounds and so forth to cover themselves, cover the person. So like I say, I've been on the fence with him. The biggest thing that I question, I guess, that has me on the fence with him is about Element 115. All of Lazar's claims about it. But then again, a lot of people, when it became exposed and became a named element, said it was for real. And that's what a lot of the UFOs use as a propellant. So that's kind of where I am.
Wild, I'd kind of like to get your take on the whole Bob Lazar thing. I don't think you've ever mentioned anything about him.
Yeah. Well, I first of all, let me say this. Nobody ever mentions this about Bob Lazar, but he's a very handsome man, especially when he was younger. I think that needs to be said right now. So nobody says it. I got to say it.
It's Valentine's Day, right? So.
If you're listening, we might have a date for you. I'm just saying. Sorry, go on.
Devastating.
Are you single?
That's a good question. Okay, well, now that that's out of the way, I mean, unfortunately, good looks have nothing to do with your character or whether you actually studied UFOs for the secret government. But I do believe him, and I always have. He just struck me as true. There's no denying it. He's a weirdo. He's a weird guy, and a lot of technically minded people have asynchronicities about their personality. He like ran a brothel, or he helped. I don't want to say bad things. He was associated with a brothel at some point in his life, and so he's just a weird guy. Now, I will say, recently, if you go to Mystery Wire, a channel here on YouTube, George Knapp, who's the first one that brought Bob Lazar to the forefront, he did an interview with Robert Bigelow, who has spent millions of his own personal wealth on the paranormal. And Robert Bigelow talked about Bob Lazar. He worked with him, and he got his seal of approval. So Robert Bigelow, which is a big name in paranormal, says that he believes him too. So that's what I think. I think he's a handsome, honest guy.
But there is a lot of scrutiny around Bigelow as well, especially when it comes to the possibility that he may possess some metamaterials within one of his companies there. I mean, there was an instance where, he shut down and was, pulling off employees very quickly. There's a lot of scrutiny around that particular individual. So as much as we'd like to lean on somebody's expertise, sometimes you have to look at the whole picture. And I'm not saying you're not Wild Trees. I'm just throwing this out there.
Sure, of course, yeah.
So, Lloyd, I got a couple of questions for you. First of all, let me state this. You said that you're originally from New Orleans. I lived in New Orleans for quite a while, and when I was going to school, and that's one of the most haunted cities in America.
Where'd you live at?
And in the Quarter, I was a bartender there, and I was going to school at Tulane. And
Really?
but anyway, so yeah,
Nice.
I lived there for a little while, and it's like I said, it's supposed to be one of the most haunted cities in America. And both Ralph and I are paranormal magnets. We've had so many ghost encounters as well as UFO encounters and that kind of thing. But not once in the entire time that I lived there did I ever experience any sort of like haunting behavior. And I wonder if you found that to be true with the people that you have investigated.
Well, let me say this about the city itself. It's a very superstitious city. Everybody there seems to be superstitious about a lot of things. I don't just mean walking under a ladder or a black hat running out in front of you. Voodoo, as an example, is still very prevalent there and practiced in that state.
Yes, it is.
A lot of people don't even think about that or realize that, but it actually is going on to this day. I mean, firsthand, I've had a couple of experiences with people involved with voodoo, people being cursed by a voodoo priestess. So that's a fact. That's true. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about voodoo being prevalent in that city and in that state. In as far as people themselves experiencing a lot of things, to a degree, yes. Some do, a lot don't. I think a lot of the people that do investigations that go to the hot spots, particularly when you were able to go to the St. Louis Cemetery 1 and 2, where Marie Laveau's tomb is. There was a lot of things being caught and captured in the cemeteries there that a lot of people don't realize. Of course, today with all the crime and everything, you can't go in the cemeteries unless you're in a tour.
Right.
Going in to try and ghost hunt is taboo. You can't do it anymore. We've got the other places like the Myrtle Plantation. Some people go there. They don't catch or see anything. Other people go there, and they do. The Homa House, if you go up the Plantation Alley to some of the famous old plantations, there's a lot of great investigations that go on in plenty of those places. I've had some good results with some teams working down there, and you'd be surprised, a lot of it occurs in the French. There's several other hotels there that have a lot of paranormal activity. So it's a hot spot. It's a hotbed. If you know where to look, where to search, and where you can get into, you can do real good on catching EVPs and so forth. Interesting place to ghost hunt.
Where I lived or where I worked there was a place called the Tropical Isle on Bourbon Street. And right across the street was the Bourbon Orleans Hotel. And that is notoriously haunted. But again, I never saw anything, never experienced anything there. I mean, aside from drunken tourists, but you're right. Voodoo is extremely prevalent there. In fact, when I lived there, Chicken Man was still around. I don't know if you remember Chicken Man, but he died, I guess, probably 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. But he was a New Orleans character, a voodoo priest. But I want to touch on something else here and ask you about this. Now, you had mentioned that when you went to work after seeing that UFO and you opened your mouth about it, you all but got fired. And I totally understand that. Our viewers know that I had a memory in 1995 of being abducted in 1988. And, when I first had this memory, I mean, it was so vivid and so clear, but I questioned myself as to whether or not I was going nuts, or if maybe the whole thing was just a mass hallucination because I wasn't eating right, as the fact is that I was homeless. And so I thought to myself, I need to come to terms with this for myself before I say anything to anyone. And so from 1995 up until maybe about 2 years ago, I kept it pretty much to myself. I mean, I told people that were close to me, who wouldn't think that I was crazy and wouldn't tell me I was crazy. But yeah, I mean, and about a year ago, I had another memory come back to me, and what originally in the first memory that I had, and subsequent memories after that, I was under the impression that these beings were somewhat benevolent, that they were, just like, I don't know. I mean, they asked me a lot of questions during the abduction and that kind of thing, but there was one point, when I was on the ship and I was on the slab, and I got the feeling that this particular gray was female, and I don't know why. They all pretty much looked alike, but she came up next to my head and put her hand on my forehead, and I blacked out. And so I didn't remember anything else until after we were up. I was up off the slab, and we that alien and I were walking around the ship, and she was trying to explain certain things to me, like where they were from and that sort of thing. But for years, I couldn't remember what had happened on the slab. And it was about maybe a year ago, Ralph and my wife and I were watching this movie called The Fourth Kind, and it's about alien abductions. And one of the women in the movie was explaining what happened to her, and they were showing the recount of it. And at one point in the scene, there was a drill that was going right to her eye, and I flipped out because that triggered a memory of everything that had happened on the slab, and it was awful. I mean, horrible. And ever since then, I've been suffering from like PTSD because of it. I'm waking up almost nightly, screaming, and in a cold sweat. And so I guess that's a roundabout way of asking you, in your investigations with abductees, have you found that the majority of them have had bad experiences and suffer afterwards because of it?
He just disappeared.
Oh no, he just disappeared. Uh-oh.
Well, he should be back, I would imagine.
Well, I hope so. Let me ask the same thing of you, Michael.
I've heard both ways. Maybe like you in the beginning before I really started researching some of this, or you've had your own experience. We believe them to be more ambivalent or benevolent, I think is the word I'm looking for. But we found different at certain times. I mean, there are definitely stories that have left this mark. Now, my thought is that, very simply, what might be happening is that there are particular species who are treating us like cattle. And this is obviously not my own idea. This has been proposed many different ways before. Or there is something else going on where you have some of these more benevolent ones that do come in, but they're not necessarily the ones doing the the most predominant abductions in the sense that we're remembering. Maybe that has to do with them existing on their own frequency and they're bringing you into a place of love, and it's more of an educational experience, so to say, rather than something very invasive like these other species may be doing. So I think that there are both present, and I think that there are both with their own agendas, and unfortunately we are the ones who have the consequence on either end.
Yeah, I agree. Lloyd, we lost you there for a minute, and I don't know if you caught my entire question, but I guess, yeah, I was asking whether or not in your investigations you've had interviews with contactees or abductees who have had bad experiences, and possibly maybe the majority of them have had bad experiences.
Yes, I've read your case, by the way, so I'm familiar with what you went through. Actually, your case is pretty interesting because there's a multitude of things that you described that lead to a pattern with a lot of abductees that I've interviewed with. I had a job that, international job, actually, a great job. Traveled all over the world, all over the United States, Canada, Mexico, Europe, so forth, which allowed me to have a lot of free time in my hands. And through networking with other paranormal groups and friends and so forth, was like the word got out about abductees, and talk to Lloyd, tell him your story, see what he thinks, so forth. I've lost count at how many people I've interviewed. It's well over 100. Okay. I know you've been following my group, and I've been releasing, I've got 6 actually finished right now. I released 2 so far, and I'm going to release 1 each week, and then additional cases later in the future on actual stories and people I've interviewed and the events that they went through. The majority of them have had bad experiences. They were treated like cattle. Let's talk about abduction and what it is to begin with. Okay, if you and I abducted a child, as an example, what would be the legal ramifications of what would happen if we got caught? You'd be in jail.
Yep.
You'd go through some pretty nasty court proceedings, and your life would be ruined. You're finished. Okay. Yet we've got these entities, these beings coming here to this planet, doing it at will. No remorse about what they do to people if they get caught, which none of them have actually gotten caught. It's a terrible experience for most of the people that I've talked to. They've been experimented on. Some have been implanted. There's 2 stories I released in the last couple of weeks. Both people were implanted. They still have the implant in them. They're afraid to get them removed because of the location where it is in their spinal column. It's a dangerous operation procedure to have that done. So they're living with it. They were all taken against their will. They didn't voluntarily say, hey, come abduct me, like you see some of these fools on Facebook. Oh, abduct me. I'd like to be abducted. I want to experience it. I want to meet.
Yeah, I've always said, that's a dangerous game to play, I think. I mean, not what you ask. So, yeah.
Well, very quickly, Lloyd.
It's like the people. Yeah.
Okay, so I know there's a lag here between us.
People that are divulging. Okay, what I was going to say, just to finish up my thought, was the fact that we've got people now divulging in CE5 techniques. Okay,
right.
Most of them don't have any business doing that. They don't know what they're calling in. They don't know what's going to happen, and so forth. To me, it's a dangerous thing. Unless you're in a controlled group with someone that knows exactly what they're doing, it's like playing with a Ouija board. You're dealing with fire.
Right.
Dangerous. I don't recommend it to anybody. Okay, so anyway, that was my last thought.
All right, so
Michael.
I was gonna. Sorry, now this is interesting. I love this form here. I was going to ask you. So you're mentioning people that have implants, and this is something, of course, that we've all heard. But there's been a lot of nebulous information when it comes to the medical diagnosis of this sort of thing. The person who's saying that they have an implant tells you that they went to the doctor. Several things happen from that point, whether the doctor completely ignores it, covers it up, or so forth. I mean, I haven't really heard any other options other than, something that sits within that spectrum. So in your research, what are you hearing doctors say about these implants? And, is there any documentation on their thoughts of the matter, or are the majority really trying to cover things up and play it cool? What have you found?
Well, we lost a great doctor, Roger Lear, who was removing implants years ago. And Daryl Sims right now, I guess, is probably the forerunner in his studies and his research on people that have implants and what they look like. Some of that have been removed that he has samples of. And he worked with Lear for a while before he passed away. But doctors today, I've got a case that happened in New Mexico as an example. This guy was an ex-NFL football player that got abducted, a big guy, rough guy. And when he got taken on board the ship, he was fighting them. They were trying to get him to stay on the table and telepathically tell him, we're not going to hurt you, we're not going to harm you stuff. And he was fighting them, and a larger, taller one came out, which was kind of interesting, and opened up the palm of its hand, had a round, kind of like a pocket watch looking item, and touched him on the head and knocked him out. Well, come to find out later on, months afterwards, he had one of his scheduled physicals due to some of the injuries that made him retire from the NFL league. And they found what they were saying was a piece of metal in his spinal column. Now, he didn't have any accidents. He was never shot. He didn't work anywhere with metal to have a metal piece, stuck in his spinal column. Most doctors don't know what the hell they're looking at. If you went there and told them, hey, I got abducted last night, my nose is bleeding, I feel something funny vibrating in my nose, and maybe I got an implant from an extraterrestrial, can you check it, doctor? You know what they're going to do to you? They're going to,
Right.
they're going to refer you to go see a psychiatrist. Get out of my office.
Right.
Now, if they find something in an X-ray or a CAT scan, they're going to notify you that, hey, we found this little, looks like a piece of metal stuck in your nose or behind your ear. You need to go see so-and-so, this doctor specialist, to see if he can remove it or diagnose what it is stuff. That's pretty much where doctors are today. There's very few that are going to sit down and hear you out before they declare you crazy and tell you to leave their office.
Yeah.
It's really a touch and go situation with a lot of people. Terry Lovelace, as an example, he has an implant in his leg. Doctors verified that it's there, but he's still walking around with it. He doesn't want to have it removed. And most of the people I've spoken with that think or have verified through an X-ray or some sort of procedure that think they have one, have them. They kept them.
Why do you think that is?
Kind of, I think some people relish the idea that they'll be contacted again, or in some cases, depending upon where it's located, the procedure to remove it is dangerous. They don't want to risk that. There's a lot going on with that psychologically with people, and having operations on something that, the doctor doesn't even know what it is yet until he, takes it out. So there's a whole different scope of those answers.
I have 2 questions I'd like to ask, if I could, Lloyd. Okay, so my first question is...
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. My first question is, Yeah, I can't remember the first one. Let me ask you the second one. My second question is, okay, my second question is, do you think,
You're jumping around.
I know, sorry about that. What do you think is your explanation?
You
What do you think is
froze
your
on me.
origin? Okay. Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think is their origin? Do you think they are extraterrestrial? Are they future travelers, etc.? And my second question is, do you think that what people see, what they remember, is actually what they really do see? Or do you think that's a screen memory and they actually look differently and what happens is actually different? Those are my two questions.
All right. I didn't hear half of your last question. Why don't you repeat that? We'll start with that one first.
Okay. Do you
Can you
think
repeat the
that,
last question again? I only heard half of it.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Do you think the memories people have of what they saw and experienced, do you think they're genuine? Do you think they actually saw that? Or do you think it could be a screen memory or it could be like fake? They actually saw something else and something else happened to them. Do you think we could trust their memory?
Yes and no. A lot of the people have screenshots or screen memories implanted in their mind. That's the way that most of the abduction ETs cover their tracks. They implant in your mind different screenshots of things you're familiar with, things that you like or things that are pleasant. Maybe even a member of your family that passed away, angels. I mean, it's all over the map. They plant those screenshots to cover their tracks. A lot of things, people associate with seeing owls, as an example, after an abduction days later.
Yeah.
I've got one case where a school teacher and her son, they were coming back from piano lessons. Now, this boy was 10 years old. He wasn't doing too well in his piano lessons. And long story short, they ended up being abducted. They got home. They were both in a daze, didn't know what happened, lost time. Woman noticed she was missing one of her favorite earrings. Her son had some bruises and scrapes all over his arms and legs that she couldn't account for. And they both went to bed. The next morning, as an example, they got up and the little boy went outside in the backyard to play, and he came running back inside, said, Mommy, come out here and look in the yard, look up in the trees. It's full of owls. They had two large trees in the backyard. They'd never seen an owl before. And Lord and behold, there were 4 owls sitting in a tree looking back at them.
Oh, wow.
The Greys are notorious for covering their tracks, planting false memories in your mind, doing things to instantly abduct you without you knowing what's really going on. They'll even go into the paranormal end and do a lot of things such as things that people would equate with ghosts doing, going through walls, windows, doors, ceilings, flashes of light, and so forth. There's a lot of different. Every story that I do on an abduction is different than the one before. Going to your first part of your questions, who do I think is doing it? Where are they coming from?
Yeah.
My personal opinion is we've got new extraterrestrials coming and passing through our area of space, this solar system, probably weekly or maybe every day or monthly. Who knows?
Okay.
Those could be the ones that are continuing to discover humans, this planet, the life on this planet, and the ones that are doing a lot of the abductions. You got to think about it. And I thought about this myself too years ago. I said, my God, if they're trying to harvest our DNA, how much DNA do you have to harvest to equate to what a human's made out of to duplicate that?
Right. Right.
Why does that sequence have to be repeated over and over? Are they making hybrids with what they're collecting? Possibly. It's said that they are. Are they abducting people in a slave trade? Like the missing 411 cases. Are people being abducted? And there's millions of people that go missing every year all over this planet. Are they relocating them to populate another planet? Are they doing slave trade? We just don't know their agenda. Bottom line, we don't know their agenda, what they're really up to with abductions. It's all over the map.
Well, that's one of the things I
don't
wanted
know
to
if
bring
that
up
helped answer your question or not.
It did. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I want to ask you about their agenda.
You're
Now, it seems like the people that are reporting bad experiences with abductions, generally it's with the Greys. Now, I've heard, in fact, Keith had a really good experience with an alien, but those experiences usually come from people who have been taken by like Pleiadians and that sort of thing. But it's usually the Greys that are cast in a bad light. Why do you think that is? Why are the Greys so nefarious?
Well, there's more of them probably. The other thing that I firmly believe, after doing all this research and study, I believe a lot of the Greys are bots. Okay,
that's what
they're
I think.
Controlled by either artificial intelligence or someone else controlling them. They may be running scout crafts, abducting people, bringing them to a mothership for experimentation. They're taking orders from someone else. They all seem to fit a pattern. And the pattern I'm speaking of is in telepathy, they usually tell people, we're not going to hurt you, come with us. We mean you no harm. Don't fight us. You hear those 3 or 4 sentences repeated by many different abductees. When they ask, don't hurt me, or don't take me, or why are you taking me? They all fit the same MO on things that they tell them. And to a degree, I think they're bots. They're not living life forms like us at all, flesh and blood. There's always someone else controlling them, and it's always either a taller ET, a Manus type ET,
Yep.
tall blonde-headed ET that ends up doing the experiment on people. The other thing that's really got me highly interested, I had a couple of cases where people described being abducted by the Greys, being on a craft and seeing human type people just like you and I in uniforms, working in conjunction with the Greys, almost to the degree of describing them like military people, our type of military people. And that's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah, you know what? That leads me into the question I was going to ask you, Lloyd. Is there's a treaty that was reportedly signed back in the 1950s, and for the life of me, I can never.
With Eisenhower.
Is it the Eisenhower? Yeah, it was with Eisenhower. I can't remember the name of it, and for some reason, that's an ongoing problem. But if you're familiar with this treaty, do you think that this actually happened? And is there somewhere in a dark vault that perhaps this does exist in a physical form?
Yes and yes. If you recall, Eisenhower disappeared for a couple of days. Okay. Now think about it. The press usually hounds the president. They know every move, almost before he thinks about making a move, where he's going, what he's going to do, who he's going to see, what his schedule is the next week or so. Do I believe it happened? Yes, I do. Did Eisenhower sign a treaty with him? I think he had no choice. He gave them permission to have free hand in as far as cattle mutilations, abductions, and so forth on humanity. And I think he sold us out, not for the good of humanity, like free energy sources or maybe medical things, but for alien technology. When you think about it and look back from his time, how far we've jumped in advancement in technology is just incredible. That all just didn't happen by circumstance. So yes, I believe that he signed a treaty with him. I believe that for a fact. There's plenty of articles on it. I mean, you have to weed through them and see which ones are factual, but a lot of other ufologists swear by it. They believe it too.
Yeah, there's a theory out there, and I can't remember what it's called, but that our technology doubles on itself every 3 years. And so they say that that's why we're getting more and more technologically advanced, and probably why we're going to have AI technology embedded in our bodies here very soon, because the technology for AI is just going nuts. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it all started with the Eisenhower administration. Wild, you've been kind of quiet on this. What are your thoughts on all this?
I'm always thinking about Mr. Lazar. I don't know. I haven't really. I mean, I've heard this idea that our government has worked with the Greys. I think our government definitely knows of the Greys, but I haven't delved too deeply into this thought that the government would have signed something with the Greys. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't looked into it, and therefore I don't really have an opinion. I don't want to state something that I'm not sure of. Yeah.
So the government signed stuff with everybody, including the Indians. Remember?
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it stands to reason that was some pretty accurate information, at least in my opinion. I mean, there's many different sources that talk about these documentations, and yet nobody's been able to produce them. But that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't exist, like the Dulce Papers, for example, or Preston Nichols' accolades in colleges and so forth. We're talking about covering up the tracks of, people who later on become more prominent in the public eye regarding this field. So
I think that we have two different governments, and when it comes to extraterrestrial agreements or knowledge and so forth, you have the one government that is in the background, the dark side of it, so to speak, the black ops, if you want to call them that, and then you have the government that they want you to see.
Sure.
So you had mentioned Terry Lovelace earlier.
And
you had mentioned Terry Lovelace earlier, and he's going to be on our podcast, PodBean, next month, and I can't not wait to talk to him. He just seems like a really fascinating guy. But
he is.
Yeah,
he is.
So yeah. We've got Chuck Bam in the room, and he was mentioning that, all aliens are bad, and that he mentioned, he said, let me get this up. There we go. The Greys use humans for fuel. They work on our DNA, so we burn efficiently. Now, this is not some wild theory. I've heard of this a lot, that that's part of their agenda, is that, I've heard they eat humans. So where are you on that, Lloyd?
You removed him.
I'm kind of on the fence with that, because we really don't have any definitive proof. It's been rumored that it may not necessarily be the Greys. It could be reptilians that are harvesting us for food, children particularly. We don't know how they actually, what they use as fuel, and as far as consumption for food as we know it, do they absorb things? like possibly human blood. That's been said. That's what they live off of. Then you have people that say that they've seen reptilians on a ship actually dissecting humans and consuming them, children particularly. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's there's no, like I'm saying, no definitive proof that that's going on. You believe what you want to believe on that. They have to be some of them, not all of them. You know, not pointing at the Greys in particular, but they have to be some type of source of food as we kind of know it, that they have to intake to survive. You know, if the Greys are bots, I mean, they could be running off a battery for all I know, nuclear powered, who knows? But some of the rest of them, like the reptilians, that's a possibility. That's one to think about.
Yeah. You know, I'll be honest here. I think that it's a pretty wild theory, even for me. And I know coming from me, it sounds strange, but you know, to me, unless these beings, because we don't know any of the parameters of these beings' existence, unless these beings are predominantly physical in form and they need to take in nourishment the way that, you know, our human body does, you know, there's a long story as to why we are where we are today, and it has to do with consciousness. Shortly stated, essentially, at one point in our evolution, if you will, or our existence here on Earth, we were more etheric, and we actually were connected to, you know, what people call prana. And, you know, we actually can do this today with the discipline to get back to that point. But long story short, we didn't need to eat and we didn't need to sleep the way that we do today. In fact, if you ate something, it was because you just enjoyed the flavor of it. It was not because you needed it as sustenance. So in my opinion, when it comes to these extraterrestrials harvesting us in this particular way, in a purely physical, the movie Matrix sort of way, it's possible, okay? You know, we can sit here and say anything is possible. Is it likely? I think the likely story was that if they are consuming humans in any shape or fashion, they're after the consciousness. They're after the esoteric energy that we possibly possess. There have been many projects that have been talked about in the past wherein people were isolating this essence of, you know, the human soul or spirit, if you will, and were able to manipulate it. Now, if, you know, in any regard, we were able to do that, perhaps even getting the technology from extraterrestrials. Well, they've already had the technology and they're able to do something like that. They might be at a consciousness level where that's how they're taking, sort of in a psychic vampire sort of way, and perhaps a little bit more literally when it comes to, you know, an actual physical person. But again, I think that this is a really interesting theory that's really out there in left field. Again, I think there'd have to be many variables and factors that would need to be met in order to really entertain that as a legitimate theory.
Yeah. I couldn't possibly agree with you more. Lloyd, we've lost you a couple of times now. Is it because of your weather?
Yeah, I'm back. I think it is, yeah, but I'm back on.
Yeah.
I'll get back on as quick as I get knocked off, I guess.
Well, we're going to get out of here pretty soon anyway, but yeah. So Ralph, do you have any questions?
I want to know what you thought of these abductions that people are having and are returned. Excuse me. Why do some of them have stories of good and some of them have stories of bad? Do you think that they're just not remembering all of it, or is it a different situation when they were abducted?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't remember immediately. Some can take weeks, months, years, and then again, they could have something happen to trigger it in 10 minutes after they are back. It just all depends on the individual. Majority of people. Let me back up and say something to kind of answer the first part of your question. I don't really believe, to a certain degree, a lot of people that'll come out and say, "Hey, I get abducted regularly, you know, once a week, every 6 months." I have a hard time following and believing them. I'm not saying that's not true. There's probably some genuine people that have had several abduction experiences. Most of the people that I've spoken with, that I, to a certain degree, believe and think it's factual, have had one, possibly two abductions happen. Now, this could have been at an early age in their life, and later on, as they got older, it happened a second time. It could have very easily have happened also with a sibling in the family, or a family member, or a mother or father. I believe those wholeheartedly. But people that come up and tell me they get abducted, I've had people tell me every other day. I mean, I don't believe that. That's silliness. You've got to understand too, there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that have mental problems. We've got this pandemic going on right now. A lot of people are locked up and have been now for over a year. And the stories and people contacting me that saying they've been abducted are going through the roof. I mean, it's more now than it's ever been in years past. And I think that has a lot to play with it, what's going on right now with the pandemic and people being locked in their houses, so to speak. The other people that claim that, they had a good experience. Oh, it was wonderful. It was spiritual. Oh, they told me to save the earth, and it was all flowers and lovely this and lovely that. That's 1 out of 10, and some of those encounters could be dreams, could be a mental condition, people looking for attention, and so forth. I've got and I won't say it, okay, but I've got a little formula worked out of like about 8 to 10 questions that I usually ask someone when they contact me and tell me, hey, I've been abducted and I want to talk to you about it, to basically qualify them, okay, before I invest hours, days, or weeks of my time getting involved in it. And usually if they fail that test, I'm done with them. I hate to say that, and it may sound rude, but there's a lot of people out there with problems that think they're being abducted that aren't. They've got other issues that they need to address with themselves. I'll tell you one. How much time do we have left? Because there was a case I wanted to talk to you guys about.
Oh, feel free.
That okay. This happened. Let me get the paper real quick so I can tell you the year that it happened. It happened in Mexico, and I was involved in this case. It was pretty interesting. Years ago, I was at doing some work, research on Mayan temples in the Cancun area of Mexico. And I don't see it on my desk here, but I can tell you from memory. Anyway, I was in Tulum at the Mayan temple there doing some research and study. And I met a young couple. They were 2 students in archaeology that were actually working a dig on the other side of Chichen Itza, which is another, you're probably familiar with it, Mayan ruin there in the Cancun area. And we sat down and had lunch and chatted and so forth. And they were telling me what they were doing and invited me to come out to the dig, to come see what they were finding and so forth. And I agreed to do it. So we spent probably a couple hours walking around the ruin. They were pointing out some things I didn't know or didn't pay attention to. That was pretty interesting. And they were taking a lot of readings with the Geiger counter. And actually what they were looking for, believe it or not, was the possibility of portals maybe in that area. And different things. Different things off topic from archaeology. They were doing this all in their own free time. Anyway, they departed. I drove back to Cancun. This was back in the early 70s. When I first started going to Cancun, there were only 2 hotels. One I was staying in, and the one next door that was under construction. It's like the Mayan Riviera today. It's totally changed night and day. So there wasn't a lot of traffic on the roads other than maybe a tourist bus. There wasn't a lot of cars to rent. There weren't a lot of things to do, particularly once you left the downtown area of Cancun. Anyway, these 2 individuals were driving back toward the Chitzania area to their campsite to meet up with the other students. And they came around a bend in the road, and there was a UFO sitting parked on the 2-lane highway. They both stopped the car. Both of them stopped the car. The girl started screaming and hollering because the guys wanted to get out of the car to get a better look. And next thing he knew, she was walking towards the UFO. And he said at that point, he just blacked out, basically, lost time and everything. Well, long story short, about 3 or 4 hours later, sometime like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, the police found both of them laying in a ditch on the side of the road near their car, took them to the hospital. They had a full examination. Oh, yeah, they had a full examination and spent the night in the hospital. They were released the next day. They called me at my hotel because it wasn't very far away from where the hospital was. And we got together for lunch, and it was just an incredible abduction story they told. They were both taken on board this ship. It was the Greys again, but it was a tall, blonde-headed, Nordic-type individual. They said there were 2 of them in blue uniforms that ended up doing the various experiments on them. And they were probably on board the ship. They described it pretty much to a T on what you hear in a lot of descriptions of the interior of a ship with the various soft lighting, no seams in the walls, corridors that go on and on, that actually when you get inside of a ship that might be 50 or 75 feet in diameter is like a football field on the inside size-wise when you get into it.
Yeah.
Which I've had several people describe that to me before. This particular ship on one corridor had various glass vats with different species of animals, humanoid-looking humans, and so forth, floating in a liquid in some of these vats. And various experiments were done to both of them. They recalled it instantly. I mean, they remembered everything within hours of getting out of the hospital, because prior to meeting up with me, they were sitting at the hospital trying to figure out the lost time pattern, what happened, and do you remember seeing that thing sitting on a highway that we had to stop the car for? So, I mean, the case is a pretty involved case. I wish I could go into more details if we had more time about it, but it was a case where I was there. Thank goodness I didn't decide to follow them to go to their meet up with their group, because I guess I would have been involved in it also. But you just never know. It's one of those things. But they had an incredible situation. Now, both of them had nightmare type dreams, recalling in more detail later on when they got back to the States what had happened. One of them did actually medically have an implant found in their ear area. It was a girl. She was implanted. They did have various fluids, sperm from the guy, he said, and she believes they went into her ovaries. and did some things there. Both of them did do and go through regression therapy afterwards, and had all of it brought back to light on what they actually had been through. And that's another thing about regression and hypnotic sessions. A lot of people that I've dealt with, depending upon who is a certified doctor to do hypnotic regression with the patient, a lot of these patients with somebody that's untrained, uncertified, can almost implant those type of thoughts into your mind and enhance people to believe different things that they may not have even experienced or had happen to them. So on regressions with people that are quick to go to someone that says, "Oh, I know a hypnotist that can, bring you back and tell you what you went through, and it might take a session." There's a lot of people out there that are quacks doing hypnotic work that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, I think Dolores Cannon would agree with you on that.
Getting off.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Michael. What did you say about Dolores Cannon?
I said I think Dolores Cannon would agree with him 100%.
Oh, yeah. As far as hypnotists go and people who do regression therapy, I know of one that is very credible, and she specializes in working with the UFO abductees. And her name is Lori McDonald. She was on our podcast a while back, but she seems extremely credible to me. But you're right. There are a lot of people out there just trying to make a quick buck, and they're not really trained to do this sort of thing.
No.
So
no, that's true.
Anyway, yeah, I think we are going to get out of here for the night. Lloyd, thank you so much for being here. Oh, and we just lost him. Guys, it's always a pleasure to have you two on, and
likewise,
we'll certainly do this again next week. And viewers, don't forget to like and subscribe to the videos, and hit the little bell there after you subscribe, and so you're notified every time that we do upload a new episode, or we do one of these live events. So anyway, thanks for being here, and viewers, thank you for being here, and until next time, keep thinking and question everything.